that extends towards Southport, Formby. We also cover St Helens, Warrington, Knowsley and Halton. So it's a huge area. So the trust covers, so it's quite a huge area to work in. But it's got its challenges, as you can imagine, but it's also got its rewards as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ajit. I know you've been having challenges joining us this evening,
Yeah.
and I've got a little one in the back, so if you hear some noise, please bear
Oh,
with
that's
me.
lovely to hear, Zarel.
Yeah. Ajit, this evening, I know I did send you a topic of mental health and well-being, and we wanted to talk about symptoms of mental health and well-being during this time. But what I wanted to focus on really is us, ethnic minority people, people of color, how
Yes.
different are our system, our symptoms in terms of presentation. I normally give a scenario where a lady committed suicide years ago. When I was in forensic services, and she was of Indian background, but every time you went to her bed space to say how she is, she complained of tummy pain, she complained of feeling tired. She never ever said anything about depression. She never highlighted anything in terms of low mood.
Yeah.
So mental health and well-being in the communities that we come from is a taboo.
Yeah.
So we don't talk about it. We relate it to things like demons, religious beliefs around spirituality. We relate it to curses, to witchcraft. And as a result, for the years that I've spent in mental health services, we are like hard to reach. We
Yeah.
really, and I remember when I managed wards, I probably nursed about two people of color.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that represents the population that we live in. So
No.
what sort of symptoms and signs, Ajit? I know you've worked in Manchester, Liverpool, you've been around for a long time. What sort of symptoms and signs do you guys see in people of ethnic minority background?
That's a very, very interesting question, and many thanks. And really, also, I wanted to thank you for inviting me to talk about something that I've worked in and more or less campaigned for a long time. And also, I've got the experience actually. We're working with hard to reach communities. Um, I'll just briefly give you a background in that. Prior to coming to Merseycare, I worked in Greater Manchester, as Justine told you. I worked in psychological therapies. I was a service manager for psychological therapies for the whole of Rochdale and Bury. Two very different areas, where Rochdale was quite affluent with 12, around about maybe like 6% ethnic minority, mainly South Asian. Whereas in Rochdale, there's a 12% South Asian community, but not as prosperous a borough as Bury. So the issues were vastly different. And also in Rochdale was one of the first boroughs to actually welcome quite a lot of asylum seekers. So you had a mixture of South Asian communities that's been established there since the 1960s and before. And then you've got people coming from places like Africa into that community. So it just brought a different set of challenges to how do you engage with these communities. And the interesting thing that struck me when I went there, I worked the types of psychological therapies we did were one of the very first NHS mental health services that actually actively look for data, i.e., who you're seeing, what sex are they, what ethnic background are they from, is English their first language. So we had that data. And interestingly, even though the service had been there for, I think by the time I got there, for about 5 years, their kind of integration with the communities, that's the BME communities, the BAVE communities, was really poor. In fact, when you think proportionally, 1% of people accessing mental health services where work were of an ethnic minority, whereas proportionally it should have been 12%. So that's where I started. And all these things that Justine has said to you around how we defined anxiety and depression is very different from one culture to another, especially our culture, where the same words aren't used. For example, if you're from the South Asian community, there's no word that describes depression. There's no word that describes anxiety. Clinically, there isn't, it doesn't exist, but you can describe how you feel, but there's no actual definition in one word to say, oh, this is what I'm suffering from. Now, you move from further up to schizophrenia, again, there's no such word in that language to define what schizophrenia is. Now, if I was to ask people from the audience now, let's say you're from Uganda, what's the word for have you got a word for schizophrenia in Ugandan?
Mad.
Mad. Perfect. And do you know what? This is an
And,
absolute
that's how
fantastic.
I'm just saying it bluntly.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a sensitive thing to say, but that's
Yes.
what they call someone who is
Sorry.
psychotic or schizophrenic.
Sorry,
Yes, Wally.
sorry, can I come in here?
Yeah.
He asked you a question. What is your language in Ugandan language for schizophrenia? You are saying mad. That's English language. I'm saying sorry.
You won't be able to interpret it.
Exactly. In my Yoruba language, wait.
That's wonderful. So thank you. But do you know, this brings it to light to all of us now. In the South Asian community, guess what the definition of schizophrenia is? Mad. Mad. So when you're dealing with there's no definition. So what's normally happens, to answer your question fully, so how come we're not able to actually fully access this hard to reach population is purely because we don't have the right words to describe what's going on for people. Because think about it, right? For all those of you that's been to at some kind of information event like I'm doing by, let's say, the NHS or another organization, I bet you someone goes there with a definition. Oh, I'm going to talk to you about depression now. This is what depression is. These are the symptoms. Now I'm going to talk to you about anxiety. This is what anxiety is. These are the symptoms. And I'm going to talk to you about schizophrenia. This is what it is. But what people don't realize, they're coming from a good perspective. However, what they're describing, the audience can't relate to. They absolutely can't relate. You can bring the best professor of psychiatry and say to that person, go and spread the word what mental health is, what schizophrenia is, what depression is. No, they basically are coming across. No one will understand what perspective they're coming from. So,
and I'm glad, Ajit, I'm really glad you're saying that, because you're originally from Mauritius, isn't it?
I am.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm from Uganda. We've got people from Nigeria. We've got people from Ghana here.
Wow.
But
welcome.
People do sessions on mental health and well-being, and they talk about lack of sleep, poor appetite, these typical symptoms of mental health and well-being. They talk about the biological aspects of anxiety, palpitations, tearfulness, slow mood. But how do you define those things? Then what is forgotten, Ajit, and everybody here on this call who is from another country has something we call an immigration journey. So 25 years ago, as a teenager, I left Uganda. That broke up all my attachments. I'd been in boarding school. I had made friends. I left my parents. I left everything I've ever known, came into this new environment. That obviously traumatizes my psychological well-being as a teenager settling in here. Then I come in here, and while I'm defined as a global majority, I'm actually the minority in the environment I'm in. So then I start to battle with, racism and culture changes and culture shock and, all the attachment issues psychologically. But what worries me is that in mental health services, during assessment, that's not touched on. We tend to look at the westernized symptoms of mental illness. And I don't know what you've got to say about that.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about being basically being uprooted, coming somewhere else. You're already somewhere different, and then you're having to actually embrace, shall we say, new ways of defining what's going on for you. That's a big move, isn't it? How did you do it, Justine? I mean, that'd be interesting to find out. How did you make that transition?
And I think I've always said to people, this is the reason I do these sessions, because most young people that I work with or who come to speak to me, it's not just them being depressed or anxious. It's that detachment. It's that lack of identity, lack of
Yeah.
belonging, lack of self
Yeah.
that actually trims them into losing their self-esteem and confidence.
Yeah.
And by the time you know it, you've got a child who spends a whole day in bed, who
Yeah.
doesn't even want to brush their teeth, who doesn't
Yeah.
want to have a wash, because they don't know who they are.
They don't know who they are.
Lost themselves. And those are the symptoms that in mental health we don't identify with. And when
Yeah.
a psychiatrist sees somebody, you know, I'm not frontline at the moment. I work in corporate. But when I used to work frontline, when we used to see someone, those symptoms are not understood, and then we
Yeah.
just prescribe medication in a way that I don't feel is meaningful to the person. Because if you look at it, then we end up giving them a dose that does not work, and we think, oh, we need to give them above the BNF. And by the time you do your audits, every Black person is on 5 times the medication of a white person, and they're walking around like a zombie. And for me,
Yeah.
I when I'm doing these sessions with my community, I just think it's because our symptoms have been misunderstood.
Always.
I might give you a story about my journey of immigration. It might look like a movie to you, because you think, really? And I constantly say to people, while some people have come on a flight, unfortunately, some have come in the back of a van, some have come on a ship.
Yeah.
And we've seen different things, and those can be traumatizing. I can see, Rose, you've got your hand up to contribute.
Sorry, go ahead, Rose.
Oh, thank you so much. I think one of the things I've noticed as a person working in social care, the services have not been very helpful. They have just, made the mental health of especially teenagers, relating to Justin, who came here as a teenager. We've made their situation worse. Because it is very, very difficult to access services. The children are being tossed from pillar to post, Children's services is saying you are not a child because.
Hello, Rose? I think your audio's gone, Rose.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
You're back.
My connection is really bad. Yeah. Social services disputes the age. That is the problem. You've got to prove that you are a child if you are an immigrant. Adult service is also denying. It is, the stress that the people go through that is making even their mental health worse. Services are, a very big contributor factor to, making people's mental health deteriorate.
Almost like service due a lack of service. Sadly, that is the concern that you're expressing. Am I right in saying that? Yeah. And that's very sad. And it's only thing I can relate to, can everyone still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, yeah, you can see me as well, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Back in 1992, when I joined university to study, my area for my thesis was to look at the treatment of young Afro-Caribbean men within the mental health system. At the time, the early research was showing exactly what Rose and Justine have described, where predominantly young Afro-Caribbean men were in healthcare systems, but much further on than their white counterparts, i.e. they were detained under the Mental Health Act. 2, they were being medicated by very powerful sort of psychotropic medications for very serious illnesses that they were presenting with. And also, if they were aggressive, again, the view is they needed to go to a higher level of security, which was thought was incredibly sad and also a bit of a mystery. Why was that the case? It took many years of research to work it out. And when they worked that out, they came up with, primary care psychological therapies. What they said was, because BAME communities don't access services early on, what tends to happen is what Justin described, is this young man, young woman, or young person that's starting with anxiety and depression. They stay in their bedroom, they stop interacting, they stop going to school, they eventually become more entrenched in that kind of behavior, and the symptoms they have of anxiety, depression, maybe early stages of some form of serious mental illness, such as a mood disorder or psychosis, well, that gets worse and worse, and it's untreated. Sometimes it can go untreated for years. And like Justin said before, people might think, well, someone's cursed them, or in South Asian communities, some of you might know, or someone put a jinn on them. So, and that delays the access to treatment. Only time they get to have treatment is when the situation gets so bad, they have to intervene by using either the police to move them to a place of safety, or they detain under the Mental Health Act, as Rose will tell you, as a social worker, and they're brought into hospital against their will and then treated against their will. And how do you think that person's relationship is going to be with the care system after all that's been done to them?
And
Do
you
you
know
think
what
they're
I
gonna engage?
what I find, Ajit,
Yes.
what you've described
Yes.
is a good picture of somebody who has some religious backup
Yes.
for them. So most people who come from religious families or prayerful families, a person of ethnic minority background will go through all that pain, but will not attempt suicide because it's against his religious will. So he will live in that pain. And you see this person with, really unkempt, walking around with a heavy body, you realize that, something is not right.
Something's
But
not right.
they won't take their own life because they're worried. But these days we have an increase in suicide attempts with young people because we have I call it a microwave life. Everything is very easy. We were talking about a young person who took their own life in America recently, and they went to Google and started Googling ways of ending their life quickly, and then realized using a belt would be quicker than even jumping in a train, in a train line. But actually, when you look at the pathway they had gone through, their family saw them retrieve into the bedroom all the time, and they thought, oh no, he's a teenager, maybe he's just on the games or this and this. But he was actually on Google trying to find ways to end his life. He attended this school where, racism was just up in the air. It was too much for him to bear. But being a boy, because of how society has positioned men not to talk about their emotions, he was not telling his family about these things because he thought, you know what, I have to man up. But the more he thought I have to man up, is the more pain he suffered. And then he wrote a note to his family to say, I'm sorry, but I cannot bear this anymore. And he took his life. So when you talk about psychological therapies at the moment and how they've introduced these psychological therapies, do they understand that culturally we don't talk about emotions just like that? We don't talk to strangers. I remember growing up, my mom used to tell me, you don't talk about your family life. You keep it inside the family. So how am I going to feel comfortable just going to psychology to talk about my problem?
And people don't, because like I said, there's the cultural background, and there's also let's say, Justine and everybody on this call, let's say your mom and dad talked to you about depression and anxiety from being young and said, you know what, it happens. These are the things you expect. If it does happen to you, it's okay to seek help. It's okay to talk to us about it. Right? But if that's never been discussed, purely not because your mom and dad don't like to discuss it, it's because it's not part of their culture. It's not something you've done. It's not something you discuss, or, talking about mental health is relatively new. It's, we're trying to destigmatize it, but there's always this element of stigma. But also in terms of actually, there's not enough out there for people that actually are from a different culture for them to understand they can access mental health services. And if they do access mental health services, they will be understood and they'll be treated fairly. But I'm afraid we're not quite there, because myself and Justine, we've worked in the healthcare system, although we do some fabulous work, but where we actually need to do more work is actually making the service fit for purpose for people that aren't necessarily from this culture originally, but they do live here now, they do contribute to this country, and they have to be, and their mental health is as important as the next person. So that's the divide at this moment in time. I mean, what I'd like to ask people, is that their experience of mental health services? Do you feel that you're able to actually turn up at your GPs and express how you feel? And do you feel you'll get the right service? I don't know. Anybody can? Anyone?
Oh, I've got Rosemary.
Rosemary?
Unmute Rosemary.
Yeah.
Hi, Rosemary.
Hi, Jim. I have, because, I can't compare with myself with somebody who's lived here for a shorter period of time. Because I've lived here a very long time, and I've mixed with all sorts of people.
Yes.
I know personally that I can go and talk to people if I need such help. And again, I find that sometimes when you have friends, you can talk things through.
You can
understand. It can keep that professional person out of the way for the meantime.
Yes.
Because you've got people you feel will listen to your woes without getting bored with you constantly talking about yourself.
Can you unmute Rosemary? You've gone back on mute.
What is doing, is meeting me? I don't know who, but it's not me. So I'm trying to say that, I cannot say because I can do it. Everybody can do it, but because I've been here for a very long time, and again repeating what I said before in case people didn't hear me, I'm mixed with all sorts of people in different background.
Yes.
And so I've worked with professionals in the job I did. As a result of that, I've always known that I can talk to people about my, anything I'm feeling about myself. So I've never needed to seek professional help, but will not hesitate to do so if I feel that I'm feeling something traumatic happened to me years ago. And I didn't think I needed, it's quite ironic. I wasn't offered talking therapy.
No.
I was offered medication.
See, that's interesting, isn't it? Why is that? I mean,
and
again,
Ajit, sorry to cut. That's not the first line of treatment.
No,
Not someone who is seeking help.
It's a long time ago. I had a miscarriage.
Yes.
So I was in a very bad place. So my GP, the first thing he gave me this tablets.
Yes.
And I came home.
Yeah.
I had a friend with me.
Yeah.
And I read the side effect.
Yes.
When I finished reading the side effect, that was the beginning of my healing. I went and put it in the bin.
Right. Okay.
Because I felt that the side effects appeared to me to be much more horrendous than how I was feeling at the time.
Yeah.
So I had to talk to her with my friends, and she supported me, and thanks to God, I came out the other end of the tunnel.
I mean, that's a very good example of, you were able to look at what you were given and you made an informed choice that, that's not for me. I've got other ways of getting myself out. But imagine, for a lot of people that, what we call perinatal or postnatal type psychosis or depression, if they don't take medication, if they're not supported properly, the consequences to the mother and the baby can be severe, to the point of loss of life, and the mother and the baby don't bond, and that has longer term effects. But this again just brings it to the point that Justine made. If you are from a BAME or ethnic minority community or a person, and you're pregnant and you got, that sort of kind of depression and psychosis, you don't seek help, or if you do seek help, this is not explained to you.
No.
And the consequences, like I said to you, are horrific. I mean, in my own family, many, many years ago, my dad's brother's wife sadly took her own life when she was pregnant with twins. And what she also did, she took another child with her. So it was devastating at the time. But now, at the time, there was no understanding of why that happened. But now, looking back, now with what we know, she had what we call postnatal depression, and it went untreated, and the consequences were devastating for the family. So what we're trying to do today is, like Justine said, is understand why do BAME communities, why don't they access mental health services? Why does mental health services not give them the kind of service that it gives everybody? I don't think it does it intentionally, but I think the barrier is the services aren't quite fit for purpose to deliver services to that group of people. It's not all doom and gloom, rest assured, because if that was the case, I wouldn't be here talking to you. What we did in Greater Manchester actually proved that nothing is impossible. I made all the mistakes everyone did prior to me. I went to community groups. I talked about mental health from a psychiatric perspective. I went to the local mosque and I talked about mental health. I went to like meetings with various kind of groups, refugee groups, talked about mental health, and nothing happened. After we'd done all this for 3 months, we looked at our access rates. Guess what? It was still exactly the same. And I spoke to one of the therapists I was working with, who was from a South Asian community, but born here. And I said, look, I don't know what else to do because no one's engaging. And that person said to me, the reason they're not engaging is they don't understand what you're saying. I said, well, most of them do speak English anyway. Why? And we have the material, and we even go further. If you go, I bet you, if you wanted something translating in a particular language, it can be done. But if I ask you, even if it's translated in a language from it's written, does it always mean people will understand what they mean?
Absolutely not, because
absolutely not.
It's westernized. I'm mindful Rose is saying she's going somewhere, Ajit, and I want to come back to you on that.
Please.
And I think the other issue I wanted to pick up from you is, what are people like me, people of color, people of ethnic minority background, what are we looking for in terms of symptoms in our children, in our friends, in our husbands, in our wives and relatives? What should we look for? So you just think about that while I get to Rose.
Absolutely.
It is as if you've read my my mind. Whilst Rosalind, is it Rosemary or Rosalind? Sorry if I didn't get your name very well. While she was talking about her experience of seeking for support, and she was given medication and she didn't take it and binned it, for her, she was able to make herself well. This week I'm working with a young person. Sadly, mom did the same, but the impact was on the child has been grave. Because this is now a child, she's only 6 years. She's already having suicidal thoughts of, based on what she was, exposed to when mom was struggling. So it is again advising people that maybe if you feel that is not the best treatment, you can still request. Let us try to speak up and say, this is not for me. I know services are very difficult to penetrate, and, GPs don't have time. I don't think they will even listen, not purposely, but because they have got to see you for a certain, limited time. If you are allocated 20 minutes, if they are over, you've got to go. So I think it is again what you said about improving services, but we have to be mindful of what we expose our children to, because this child, young as she is, she was searching on how to kill herself. You know, she first of all asked the grandparents, how can I make myself die? That was the question. How do people die? And then she started searching. She was found searching material. It's not only teenagers. So we've got to be mindful of the children also, you know, our mental health, how it impacts on the children. And for them, the impact is really big. So we've got to be very mindful of that also.
And I think when Rosemary mentions that she read the medication and decided to bin it, we have to be mindful of the causes, what's causing these, you know, these symptoms that you have. Sometimes it's, you know, some things are reactive. So I lost my mom in December and I was so down and I was really upset and I could not sleep properly for a few months, but that was due to my mom's death. And I could put it to something. And sometimes there's, you know, things like early childhood experiences. Those are traumatic experiences. You cannot just take them away. So like what Rose is, you know, describing, you know, postpartum experiences, those are biological changes. You cannot just bin them away. You have to be treated to be able to manage those things. Some people have chronic mental illness. Genetics plays in it. If it's in the family, you cannot just bin the medication knowing that your mother suffered maybe bipolar or schizophrenia, or your grandfather, because you know that there's lineage and there's connection there. So you have to speak to a professional before making a decision to bin these things. I've had, you know, people speak to me and say to me sometimes, oh, I'm having counseling with my pastor about this. And I'm pleased that sometimes some religious leaders do come to reviews and they say, we will support the inclusive side of things, the social inclusion side of things, so the religion, the belief, you know, it helps. But the biological changes have to be dealt with by medication sometimes. But it's challenging that medication. I'm coming to you, Rosemary. It's challenging that medication. Sometimes I've gone with young people from my community, Ugandan community in Liverpool or Manchester or St. Helens, and they would call me. I would go with them and I would say to the doctor, no, you're not giving this young person citalopram because it has cardiac effects on him. So he's not. Let's try Satlin. Let's try this. So, because I know what the medication means. So I say, you're not giving them first line olanzapine because you've not tried Abilify. You've not tried this. So make sure you go with somebody who knows what they are talking about so they can challenge the status before you bin the medication. And Rosemary, I'm mindful you've got your hand up.
Because I did mention I've been there and I was supported. And I did say I had somebody with me who held my hand. And again, people react differently. I personally have been through a civil war and I had a lot of trauma. And I knew how I was supported by people to help me get over it. Maybe some people, you know, I'm not saying that I'm stronger than anybody else. When you've been through so many things in your life, you learn how to try and manage your situation. So that's one thing I need to say. I was supported. I had a very good friend who was there for me and supported me. That's what I mentioned that because that was crucial. I didn't just bin it and walked away scot-free. No, I had support.
Absolutely. And that psychosocial support around you is always important, very important. Because sometimes here we don't have aunties, we don't have uncles, you're on your own. So that's absolutely right. And Rosemary, we are not saying that was wrong, but somebody can learn from that and think, I can bin it as well. So this is why we had to echo the fact that understand the cause of what you're going through and the psychosocial support that you have around you to help you go through what you're going through. That's important.
Yeah, I know it's very, very important. I didn't just get up in the morning and say, well, I'm fine because I've been there. You know, I felt at the time, I'm talking about 30 years ago, you know, you could get help. If I wanted help, I think I would have got it. But I felt I needed more talking therapy.
Mm.
I'm a very big advocate for talking therapy first before chemical support.
Absolutely. I'm going to come back to you, Ajit, about the symptoms.
Yes.
And as women, we love to talk, don't we? We love to talk.
And
And
do
I
you know
remember
what?
I used to have these audits of one-to-one sessions when I managed units. And you would get 40 sessions from a female ward and get 5 from a male ward.
That's
So women,
interesting.
we are very happy to talk about our problems, but actually
men
I don't think
don't.
men are. So Ajit, over to you. What do we look for?
Okay, the symptoms.
Rosemary, is that an old hand? Oh, sorry. All right.
Yeah,
Go on,
thank
Ajit.
you. I mean, I thought, Justine, listening to Rosemary and Rosie, very, very powerful statements. And you know what? You can't beat this lived-in experience. And I'm always amazed when I do these that there's so much of that in the community. So many thanks for both of you for sharing that. I'm truly humbled by it. Yeah, the psychological symptoms you'll find for depression, for example, you'll find continuous low mood or sadness. Does that make sense to people? I.e., some days you're allowed not to be happy. Something could have happened or you're not feeling too good. But if it's always how someone is, day in, day out, week in, week out, they're always sad, always low mood, that is a symptom of depression. And when you talk to them, if they're feeling hopeless and helpless, again, that's another symptom that someone is not in a good place. And if it's continuous, again, you're looking at over a period of days, I mean, let's say if you were to talk to me after a hard day at work, you say to me, how are you? Oh, I'm tired. I'm feeling terrible. I don't like what I do. And sometimes it's hard doing what I do. But if you see me weekend, I'm out and about with my dogs, I'm happy. I'm okay. But that means it changes. It's, it's not something that's constant. Having low self-esteem, thinking, I'm not worth anything, me. And, I'm hard done to, that sort of thing. Again, that's something you need to look for. Feeling tearful all the time is another symptom you need to look for. Feeling guilty. But why am I feeling the way I do? Have I done something bad? Am I, all these things, if you see them in a person for longer than you think is appropriate or normal, they are depressed. They're feeling irritable. You can see that as well. Rather than passive, someone's very angry and they can just become angry at the flick of a finger like that. Very intolerant of others. Your teenagers, I'm sure it's not easy with teenagers at the best of times, as Justine will tell you, and I can tell you. But if that's their normal every day for weeks on end, something's not right. It's time to actually go, hang on, this is not right. Something's wrong there. Having the other one, like what you described, Justine, having no motivation or any interest in things, staying in their bedroom, not going out, not socializing, not even watching TV, not even playing with their games. If it's weeks on end, not looking after themselves, not cleaning themselves, not eating properly, something is not right. So you need to be looking for things like that. Finding it difficult to make decisions. For those of you that have experienced depression, I'm sure that's something that you are quite familiar with. If someone was to say to let's say when you're feeling anxious and depressed, let's say someone says to me, oh, Ajit, is it sunny outside? I'd go, yeah, it is. You say, if someone was challenged and say, are you sure? Well, I would be like, I don't know. I'll have to go and check again. And if that's happening time and time again, it's a symptom of depression. And the other one is not getting any enjoyment out of life. A person that's depressed, they could win the lottery and still it won't make them happy because their body chemicals, the chemicals in their head aren't allowing them to actually feel any sense of happiness, peace, any sense of being safe even. And feeling anxious and worried all the time. And lastly, that's the extreme end, having suicidal thoughts and thoughts of harming yourself, as you described, Rosie, about this sad story about this 6-year-old who was doing this. And let's not forget there's physical symptoms as well of depression, but you need to look out for. Physical symptoms, they are moving or speaking very slowly. If you know someone very well, they normally speak you know, the usual way is quite animated and they smile a lot. All of a sudden, they're moving very slowly. The speech is very, very slowed down. Something is not right. And again, what you're looking is over a period of time. Changes in appetite, weight, they're losing weight, or they're increasing weight. Unexplained aches and pain with kids. What my son, when he was anxious at school, when he was a young boy, he used to have stomach ache. And that was his way of him not going to school. And as soon as he was at home, guess what? The pain went. Lack of energy. Also, loss of libido for people that are in a relationship. Another sign of depression. Disturbed sleep. Not being able to sleep. Early waking. Very early in the morning. That's a sure sign. If it's continuous, it's a sure sign of depression. And now we've looked at mental. We've looked at physical. How about social? What are you looking for in this? The people that you know in that community. They're avoiding contact with family and friends. You're having a church activity. They used to turn up all the time. All of a sudden, they're not turning up. They have hobbies and interests. They're not doing these. They're having difficulties at home with family. They're having problems with each other. There's a lot of disagreement in the family. So these are the things you absolutely should be looking for and something that you should take seriously. You can also look at, you know, you talk about anxiety. You can say people feel restless, they're on edge, they're irritable, that you get tired very easily. You can't concentrate. Your mind goes blank. You're having difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep. If your muscles are tense all the time, it's another sign that it's a mixture of depression and anxiety. Does anything I know I'm mindful I've spoken a lot. Does anything I've said or described, does that strike a chord with anybody?
We won't be diagnosing people. Somewhere people might not want to say anything because I'm not getting diagnosed here. But I wanted to think about something that I wanted to mention with girl children, Ajit, which what is really, really common as well is low mood.
Yes.
Our MPs, like before a monthly period, you'll get a teenager really being, you know, angry, frustrated, down
Yes.
in mood, you know, sweaty symptoms, a bit like somebody who's moving into, you know, menopausal kind of phase for us, you know, for us women. And I think sometimes women 40 and above, our partners or our husbands might not know how to handle the situation.
Yes,
because they
absolutely.
just think, oh, she has changed. She's changed. She was never like that. But actually, the main cause is that because that person is premenopausal, they're
Yes.
having all these hormonal imbalances in the system at the moment. And this is why they often get on HRTs to be able to balance that, because during that time is also a very difficult time. But also some of those symptoms that you mentioned, Ajit, are a kind of way to show a parent that somewhere, somehow, your child is not having a good time either in school or in her peer circle, her circle of friends. She's not having a good time. So I get a lot of young people where I get called to have a chat with them, and they describe stomach pains.
Yes.
They describe what do they call it?
Psychosomatic type symptoms, basically.
Yeah. That word
Headaches,
I'm looking for a word
aches,
that
pains.
people will understand quickly. They call it panic attacks.
Panic
Young
attacks,
people call it panic attacks. I'm having panic attacks all the time. And in fact, I was told to one who was that anxious and kept sweating and shaking and then collapsed. She collapsed for about, 5 minutes and then came out of it. But at school, things were not very good. So it's about parents being able to identify those things sometimes.
Absolutely.
And then seek psychological support, like Ajit mentioned.
I mean, what would be good, Justine, is I will send you the presentation, and if that could be made into almost like, spread them to parents, to young teenagers, and to say it's okay to talk about all these things.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a good start, personally.
Oh yeah. And here in Liverpool, people know that we've made mental health. Ajit, you've been coming to our sessions for the last 5 years. We've made talking about mental health normal.
Yes.
It is okay to feel anxious. It is fine to feel worried. It is okay not to sleep for 3 days or 4, when you have exams coming up.
Yeah.
But if you think you're not sleeping for, 4 weeks, talk to someone. A lot
Yeah.
of people know who I am in mental health. In fact,
Yes.
I've been able to support some access services.
Yes.
So we normalize mental health and well-being
Yeah.
because it is okay and normal. I've got Kim here who says, and we all depressed at times, especially during winter,
Yeah.
because it gets dark really quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
The light is cut off really quickly. And I don't know, is that what they call? That's reactive depression, seasonal
Depression. Yeah. Yeah.
seasonal depression, because we all feel low during that time. So,
I mean, when you think, one of the things, I don't know if any of you have had experience of that. I went to the GP and had my bloods done, and in winter, and the GP said I was vitamin D deficient because black skin, like ours, it doesn't absorb enough sun in winter. So they put me on high strength vitamin D. And do you know something? After a while, my energy levels came back up.
And I think during COVID, the advice actually we really got was to be able to, all of us, people of color, be able to take some vitamin D. In our, supplements. I always take supplements in this country because our nutrition, we don't eat organic food. I mean, I think the vegetables we eat have been in the supermarket for months and months. In the freezer. So we get them from the garden. So I always have supplements. And the advice was always throughout the year, have some D's as extra as you can so that you're topped up. Otherwise, we get into hospital and we struggle with recovery because we are down on vitamin D.
That's interesting that you said that, Justine, because again, the research around mood, around energy levels for people of BAME kind of origin has actually shown that perception in the Western world is that food is plentiful here and it's cheap. Wheat, fruit, that sort of thing. However, to get the same level of, shall we say, minerals and vitamins from the food, you need to eat a lot more of it. Whereas if your food is less kind of tampered with, it's more organic, well, you only need a quarter of that piece of chicken to get the same level of protein.
As we move on, of course, you've told us about the symptoms that we are looking for and what we look for in our young people, in our family, friends, in our relatives, in ourselves. I'm very mindful of myself during the year when I think I'm struggling with something. I always back off to be able to deal with what I'm dealing with. Otherwise, I might go the other side of the road. So I'm trying to ask here, Ajit, you're in urgent care, aren't you?
Yes, urgent care, urgent response,
In terms of urgent care, urgent response, I've seen all these symptoms. I've seen 6 or 5 in my young person or the person I live with. What's the first thing that I should do?
The first protocol for that person would be the GP. Once you get to your GP, is the gateway to all services. So once you go to the GP, make sure you make time to get the GP to understand what's really going on. And most GPs are pretty good at picking up these themes and they also have got a knowledge of what's available locally. And also be very clear about, when you speak to them. Now you've heard what everyone's had to say, and I've told you about the symptoms. You make sure that you say, well, actually, this young person has felt like this for a period of time. And no matter what we do, it's not changing. So the problem needs to be dealt with. A GP may choose to say, well, actually, I'll prescribe you some medication. Also, I'll refer you to, let's say, talking therapies, or there's some charities that do kind of support at home, because what's going on for that person could be at school, it could be at home, it could be within themselves. So it's important to understand what's going on around that person.
How can I make my 15 minutes with the GP? Because I know it's 15 minutes.
Yes.
How can I make them useful without waffling off, without going off on one? How can I make them useful?
By being very, very clear about what's happening and what you'd like to happen. And I've had a similar experience myself. when I went after my mum passed away, as you know, a few years ago now, after a year of struggling, I went to see my GP, and at the time, I felt that the way I was feeling was because of my mum passing away. That was one of the contributory factor, but the main issue that was going on for me was my job at the time, and some of the people I was working with. That was driving a lot of that anxiety, a lot of depression. And also what I didn't know was I was also undiagnosed. I had type 2 diabetes. So how do you make that 15? So in that 15 minutes, as I was able to talk to that person, talk to the GP and say, this is what's going on for me. And the GP, based on that, said, well, actually, we'll do that for you. He offered me talking therapies, which I said, well, no, that won't work for me, because at the time, I had plenty of support with family and friends. I took the medication. He said, I'll also do a full physical health check for you, your bloods and everything. So to make this work for this person, insist that they checked up physically.
Yeah.
Make sure that you have an understanding what's going on for them at home, what's going on at school, what's going on in their personal life. And how long have they been feeling like that for? As long as you got that information, in that 15 minutes, you should be able to go to the GP and say, look, these are the things that we're experiencing. These are things that's happening. These are my concerns. Can you help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to overly emphasize that physical check.
Yeah, 100%.
No GP should prescribe any medication without you having your organic check, without you having your full blood count, your kidney, your
liver function, everything.
Liver function, everything should be, the whole shebang should be done before you actually prescribe any medication. Because it's very clear that sometimes medication is prescribed where someone has low thyroid and all they needed is the supplement of that, where someone's sodium levels have dropped and they just need a supplement of that. So we need to be aware of those things before we even get the script from the GP
100%.
and running off to get that medication. But what I want to kind of do a crisscross now, Ajit.
Yes.
Another problem that we've got in mental health is it's not a split, but it's a bit of a misunderstanding of autism, ADHD, and mental health and well-being. So I find a lot of young people during their teenage time, actually, they're undiagnosed from a young age. Then they hit puberty.
Yeah.
They've got these chemical imbalances in the brain, behavior change, and everything going on there. And straight away, they've got a diagnosis of ADHD or they've got a diagnosis of autism. But because they are mild and on the spectrum, they don't fall in LD. They don't fall out of the spectrum either. So LD services might never take them learning disability services. And then something happens and they end up on a section 3 of the mental health.
Absolutely.
On an open mental health ward, on antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and all sorts of things. What do you have to say about this?
That is a very, very big area of concern. And I think there's no one answer to it. It's almost runs parallel with early symptoms of mental health issues, i.e. anxiety, depression, or psychosis going undiagnosed with young people. Now, running alongside, you've got autism, you've got ADHD. These are often very difficult to diagnose unless the presentation is very obvious. And more often than not, for the majority of people, they might have some traits of autism, they might have some elements of ADHD, but it doesn't manifest itself in the same way. So again, it's about having that sort of psychological approach to things. Let's say if you suspect, one of the things you can do actually, if you suspect that a child may have autism, may have ADHD, well, the starting point would be the school. Because schools have got access to psychological camps, for example, which is children and young people services, where they can access people that can assess for why is that person not able to concentrate in school, or are they having behavioral issues at school? So what I'm trying to say to you, to everybody here, including yourself, Justine, is it's early detection is key. If it's happening at school and the person is not, for a better word, if that makes sense to people, they're not conforming to what's expected of a child at that age, for whatever reason, these issues need to be explored, which they would do for another, for let's say, most children, actually. Rather than label them with behavioral issues, they have to explore what's driving these issues. Because sometimes it may not be ADHD, it may not be autism. It could do with some form of anxiety, depression, or it could do with problems at home or bullying at school. That's creating bad behavior. So all that needs to be explored. But if it is suspected, it is ADHD or autism. Again, the school is the first port of where you get teachers or the school to actually look at why is that child not performing the same.
I'm going to come to Rosemary soon. I have this experience where I feel sometimes the schools do a bit of a letdown as well.
Yes.
So I've had a scenario where this young boy was not performing well in school at all.
Yeah.
But the school just, kept on pushing. They did not challenge. They did not support. They just moved him on from class to class. He was always in the lower state. And then obviously, he did his GCSEs and then dropped out of school.
There you go.
But when he dropped out of school, his mom was not aware of, did not know how to explore these symptoms, did not understand why. She just thought he didn't want to study, and that was it. But on top of that, he didn't want to work either. So he stayed at home in his bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And after a few months, as everybody returned to school, he started using cannabis.
Yeah.
And after cannabis, he started using spice.
Yes.
So it was like exploring from drug to drug. From spice, it was the white powder and, and all sorts of things. So he then dropped into psychosis.
Yes.
And he was constantly arrested by the police.
Yeah.
And, brought into mental health services and then medicated and then discharged because it's a dual diagnosis and that kind of thing. And as he journeyed on, it was actually discovered from what the mom was reporting to consultants.
Yeah.
Well, the mom did not understand it or label it, but the symptoms she described triangulated into an autistic diagnosis.
Yes.
But the boy was now 19.
19, yeah.
Yeah, with about, 6, crime, whatever tagged onto him. A lot of us, arrests by the police, and to be honest with you, with a failed future.
Yes.
And my question was, what happened in school? So when you say school should be able to do this. I don't know if they've got so many students and mental health services. What are we doing when people come, urgent care, frontline services, fast admission into hospitals without interventions? What are we doing to do a comprehensive assessment to understand this person's needs? I'm going to come back to you. Rosemary, please.
You've mentioned one of the areas I was going to mention. The other one is that sometimes schools are willing to support the child. And I can say that because the school where I worked, because I was around, they always tried to play by the rules. Unfortunately, in most cases, parents are not playing ball. So I know a child from the age of 9, the school and myself identified some issues with the child. But the parent, the dad is Black, the mom is white. But the mom is a bit scared of the dad, so were the children. As a result, the man will not say, it doesn't matter how many meetings we had. And I've spoken to him privately saying, look, we need to, signpost this child, you and the child. He needs to see a psychologist, educational psychologist. He said no. He said, there's nothing wrong with my child. My pastor is telling me there's nothing wrong with the child. He doesn't need to see anybody. This went on until the boy is 10, going on 11. That's when the school were no longer able to manage his difficulties in school. So he was permanently excluded. So he missed a whole year of schooling because they couldn't put in alternative education until he was ready for secondary school. Then he was put in a school. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes we Black parents or parents of color, I've seen it in South Asian families, they are reluctant to seek help or to agree for somebody to see the child. They think it's going to stigmatize the child. Therefore, I'm not allowing my child to see anybody. So that's the, schools have their own issues, which I accept. But other times, parents are the culprit, in my own opinion.
Wow. I know, Rosemary, you've worked in schools, and Rose, I'll ask this question. Do parents need to give consent for the child to be assessed under special needs services?
Primary schools, yes, we need their consent.
Okay.
Unless things have changed now. Unless things have changed now. But before I left in 2018, we still needed parental consent.
Rose?
I think that also varies on at the severity of the child's needs. Parental consent is needed, but if it is assessed that the health needs of that child, it is of great risk not to assess that child. The parents have I gone? Is it my audio or someone else here? Yeah, the child, the parents say parental PR can be overturned. It can be overruled based on the child's best interest here.
Thank you.
But usually we usually have to get the consent from parents. I think that's where I was telling people at the very beginning that we need to engage with the services, because the child can be taken away from you on the basis of failure to safeguard or promote health. That's where they can use that term or section to take the child away. It's very, very important for parents to engage with the services so that we don't make things worse.
But if the parents are camouflaging what is happening at home, especially the mother, and the child is well fed and watered, you cannot force them, to see a psychologist, educational psychologist. In my own personal experience. So unless the child is well cared for physically, but emotionally the child is not supported, and the school are sometimes, when they're dealing with two people of color, they're very, very careful in case they get accused of sort of isolation the child or trying to make how do I put it, because they're black, that's why they try to avoid that. That happens. And I'm telling you from my experience for a very long time,
that is very true, because most referrals come from school. If school really has concern, but if school is also downplaying the child's needs, then that is not helpful, because you will not have the evidence. But if school advocates for that child, those steps can be taken, unless if they are also downplaying the child's needs and you don't have any evidence.
No, this one, in my opinion, didn't happen. I am telling you, categorically telling you, it didn't happen. The schools where we had series of meetings, but the parents are saying no. But because the child is well cared for physically, they didn't want to force it.
Rachel, can you mute that person? Thank you. I can see someone.
That's my experience.
Thank you, Rosemary. Someone in the comment box saying what Rosemary is describing largely is due to stigmatization of our communities. Our Black community especially sees mainstream as the only way of education. Anything other than that is seen as family failing as per community standards. Our communities need more support and to be receptive to enable the vital changes. And I think this is where we fail. I've seen children who have not gone to mainstream schools but have been supported in a supportive environment have achieved better than children who've forced into mainstream school, knowing very well that they have a learning difficult that needs to be supported. And but again, like what this person is saying, it is that sort of stigmatization. I'm coming back to you, Ajit, about what really happens with somebody who is accessing mental health services for the very, very first time, and the comprehensive assessment to help us identify whether this person is LD or autistic, other than them just falling within the gap.
I mean, the reality of falling into the gaps apply to most, actually, even to white children, because, like I said, the areas to diagnose, i.e., some learning difficulties, ADHD and autism, very difficult to diagnose early on, and it's not always apparent because you got, as you know yourself, varying degrees of it. And again, I would say, if as parents you feel that your child is not actually achieving as they should or they can, and you think there's something else going on other than, they're not able to do that, again, the port of call has to be have an open and honest conversation with schools. But one of the things we need to take into account is, and I'm going to ask that question, and it's a very honest question. Do everyone here feel that if you were to go to a school, a mainstream school, and describe what's going on with a child, do you think they'll understand, or do you think they'll listen to you and take you seriously? I think that's one thing that stops people from actually even accessing services like ours, because people feel that A, we won't understand them, 2, we won't get it right, or we might overreact.
Or we will be judged.
Or we'll be judged.
Social services.
Absolutely. And again, if I get the question, what you're asking.
Someone has just said in the stream here, no, they will not understand because they will call social services.
Thank you. Whoever said that, thank you very much, because that's the point I'm making. We're dealing with very, very complex socio-mental health issues. It's how do you perceive services? Are they all right? Are they all white and don't understand? It's your perception of it. And having worked in services, my understanding of it is we don't always get it right. More often than not, we don't understand, because simply people like myself and Justine and a few others, we are the minority in a very, very big system. And there's not enough of us around in a, shall we say, in a position that actually can make some decisions that will actually change things for the better. It's when someone from an ethnic minority sees me and Justine, they can identify with us, they can talk to us, but we are rare.
Yeah. And I want it to be controversial. And Ajit, even in my job, I can be very controversial when it comes to issues of Black and ethnic minority people. You asked the question about, will they understand it? Will they understand us, or would they listen to us? Yeah. And, I work in NHS, and it is a very white system. And if you remember during COVID, we used to talk to people about taking the, COVID jab, and people, had all these these theories about the COVID vaccination and all that. But somebody asked me a question. I've walked into that room to take my COVID jab, and there's no Black nurse like me. Why isn't there an Asian nurse doing these vaccines, or a Black person doing these vaccines? Because we do have some trained nurses in those environments.
Plenty of.
So would you feel understood? You might walk in thinking, I'm not going to be understood anyway, because it's a very white and privileged economy. And some of the issues happening in my home environment might never be understood.
No.
And this is me speaking for, for some people. I've been called to a meeting where a social worker visited a home and found not enough food in the fridge. But what do you mean? And my question to her was, what do you mean not enough food in the fridge? What does enough food mean to you? Yeah. Because have you looked at my income versus what is in the fridge?
Yeah.
So
And that's a good point, because when you look at the impact of, like the economic downturn, or the ethnic people from ethnic minorities tend to suffer the most, actually. And that's a fact. When you look at
Absolutely.
this, okay, why are ethnic minorities more likely to live in poverty? What they say is that this is a research from the Mind charity, so it's pretty good. It's dates from October 2020. It's quite new. Despite making up 15% of the UK population, minority ethnic people account for 26% of those in deep poverty. They are 2.2 times more likely to be in deep poverty than white people. Bangladeshi people were more than 3 times more likely. That's damning. 26% more in deep poverty. There's racial inequalities dimension to social security cuts in the past decade, with black and minority ethnic families losing £806 a year on average, compared to their white families losing £454. So you can see that's almost like a 50%. So electricity has gone up. Energy bills, everything's gone up. Fuel's gone up, and the fuel. When you look at the poverty, like we call fuel poverty, it's 35% more in black and ethnic minority communities. It's a serious issue.
And I know that not many people realize that majority of people from my background do zero contract hours, so they tend to either work for an agency or a bank. So you really have to factor in what might happen when you go off sick, because if you work for an agency, you'll never be paid when you're off sick. You're paid as you work.
Yeah.
So some of those things are totally not understood by the system itself.
No.
So,
and the system, if you look at the likes of myself, yourself, Rosie, and Rosemary, we've all worked working in a professional capacity in very big organizations. And when you think about when I came to St. Helens, where me and Justine met, on the wards, there was a high number of people of ethnic minorities, including the doctors, the consultants, and a lot of the nurses. However, when it came to actually being promoted or in a position where you can make some significant decisions, we were always at the back of a queue. So I think there lays that sort of, shall we say, that disparaging view that, for us to actually do something significant that will improve health, mental health, physical outcomes of people from ethnic minorities, we need to be in a position of decision making, but we're not quite there yet.
But we can spread this information as we have done.
Yes.
Throughout our careers since 2018. We keep drumming on, we keep moving on, and things are changing at the moment. And NHS is beginning to get people in culture sensitivity lead roles where you can challenge people's treatment pathways, where you can challenge people's treatment at work. Because you mentioned something, Ajit, about work environment and how that impacts our mental health and well-being. A lot of people who are off sick from work, it's all due to racism, bullying, and harassment in work, and then it impacts their mental health and well-being. That's where they are at that. But I'm just mindful of the time. So, Ajit, we've looked at how we can access services, and you did talk about psychological therapy and GPs, and how we can explain symptoms to doctors, and also look for symptoms in our family, relatives, and people that we live around with. But I'm just thinking, is there anything that anybody wants to ask or say? Someone say, true, we're not at the table where decisions are made, yet their decisions impact on us. Absolutely. I mean, as we said the last session we were talking about, we are constantly on the outsiders looking in, and these decisions are made. I always say this, and they're made by all white people, but they're making decisions about us, about our maternal health, and yet the statistics are saying that 2 out of 4 women who go into hospitals have a baby of, of color, you're likely, either your baby or yourself are likely to come out, not alive, things like that. We die more, we suffer more, and yet we are not on the table that makes those decisions. So the inequalities impact us more. So we need to work towards how we sit on that round table to make that decision. So please, how do I continue to join this meeting in future? This is my first time. We normally share a link. We are not going to have anything until after Christmas, but after Christmas, we'll be sharing the links for mental health and well-being, and then we'll prompt people as we go along. We tend to pick themes from the reviews that have been done so that we look at what to cover during the sessions. So Faith, we will definitely let you know when those links come out. This is true, for example, in my ward where I work, a staff who has worked for over 20 years was overlooked for promotion post for a white staff who has just qualified and seniors. Yeah, that's
very
true.
common. Who said
And
that?
I always show somebody on iPhone, and I always show my face, and I say to people, by the time I've got where I am now, I don't know how many, nurses I've mentored who have just band 8.
Well, the reality
within 5-10 years. So it is
the
absolutely true.
the reality
Hi, Edward.
is it's always I used to think, that is it something about me? Is it something that I could do better? Which is, I always do. But sometimes what I've come to the realization is, again, speaking to Justine and speaking to Angela, another good colleague and friend of ours, do you know what? What I've come to the conclusion is we've worked really, really hard to get into where we are. And our strength is in not quitting when we could have done and would have done, because the inequalities, the treatment hasn't been great. But the very fact we're still here, we still care, and we're talking about mental health, and we want to do something positive to our communities, just shows that, you know what, there's something in us that's strong.
And you know what? Now we've got that backbone where we've got those principles where you can call out systematic racism when you see it. You call it out, and it doesn't matter how many white managers are seated on that table. You call it out, and they hear it out, and they'll do something about it. If you have to challenge it, you do. So there is a pathway now to do it. While in the past, when we started challenging these things, we didn't have that backbone.
No, it wasn't allowed.
So we now have the support where you can actually go to the board and say, this is absolute systematic racism. The system is racist because of A, B, C, D. And you point it out and they think about it. In the past, it wasn't talked about. So it's a journey we start. I always say to people, I've got children. I don't want my children to go through the mental health, and well-being that I actually suffered. People talk about unconscious bias. Is it really, or is it just white privilege? These little microaggressions, is it unconscious bias or white privilege? So
we need to talk about that, don't we?
I'm trying to organize somebody from BRAC to come and talk to us about it. So when that comes out, I will definitely call people.
Please, Justine. And I'd love to contribute to that, because I'm writing an account of, my experiences and where I've started, my experiences, where I've come to be, and really where we need to be. But don't forget, the whole country in itself, there are big changes afoot. If you look at government, Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister, and James Cleverly is the Foreign Secretary. These are the highest posts that you can have in government, and they're both occupied by 2 members of the BAME community.
Yeah, absolutely. Rose, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, and just on the lighter note, I will always remember while working how somebody will say something offensive to you, and you respond as professional as you can to to what they said to you. Then they go to the toilet to cry. Then you become the bad person. So which means you've been on the receiving end. You've said something really nice, very innocuous something to them, and they go and cry. That has been my experience most of my working life.
Very true, Rosemary. Very, very true.
Interesting. That molding of what do they call it? That black aggressive woman. She is
Yes,
being aggressive to me.
100%.
Yes.
Black,
Right.
aggressive woman with a chip on their shoulder. And that person, I mean, me and Justine know somebody that I challenge, someone that impeccably, without any doubt, was as prejudiced, as aggressive as you got. I challenged her about 4 times, and every time she cried, she went crying to the senior managers. And I'm sure they said, this Ajit chap, he's so difficult. He's got a chip on his shoulder, same as Rosemary. So me and you really were bad people. Yeah.
Right. Rose Katana, you've got your hand up.
No, I actually wanted to say that I wanted to excuse myself, but let me contribute towards that. I had, a similar experience whereby, and it is really tricky to be in a professional challenging another professional, or someone who is a bit of lower rank than yourself. I had a similar experience whereby this. She's a white American lady. But when I challenged her, she started crying. She became the victim. And I looked at her and I asked her, why are you crying? I had to ask her, why are you crying? You are the one in the wrong and you are crying. Does that mean that you are listening to what I said? Or you are trying to make me guilty? And she didn't like it. She actually reported me to my manager.
But I always say, isn't it wonderful to be in a safe space where people can actually talk about these things? Because we walk around, I guess when someone cries and you're challenging them, you go home thinking, what have I done? You start wanting to reflect on yourself and thinking, oh my goodness, what did I say that is so bad that made them cry?
I think what I did, I just challenged her crying, which she didn't like more. Because for me, it didn't make sense, sincerely speaking. I want you to report me when I've done something wrong. Yes. I wanted to know what wrong I'd done. And I said, you are the one in the wrong. I've said something and you are crying. What does it mean?
Isn't it really hard for our children to actually suffer this from school? Then they go into university, they go through the same cycle of systematic racism, then into work, someone else gets promoted instead of them, someone else gets considered for good things instead of them. Because in school, children of color start from the lowest set because they are compared for English to be their second language, when they're born in the UK. So they have to prove themselves to be moved to a better set. So this thing starts with them, unfortunately, from the day they also go to school, and then they're asked, where are you from? Like from? Some of them have never even been to our countries of origin. You understand?
From Liverpool.
Yeah.
Where's that?
And then somebody touches their hair and they go, oh, is that a wig, or is it falling off, or is it, do you have hair? All those things. And then they have to go to university and go through the same thing. Then they have to go through work. Do you realize that by the time they get into work, they're carrying a heavy load?
Yeah.
Their identity. And no wonder we've got high suicidal rates in our communities, despite us being the minority. But I'm just mindful of time and wanting to close off. So we've got a review being shared in the chat box. So if people can actually do a review that is being shared, how many of you, I saw something that I didn't, how many of you get, oh, you're white? Very well. Why shouldn't I? How many of you get? I don't get this question, but I don't get this question. So as we close off, really, I don't know, Ajit, if you've got something to say to close off.
Yes. Yeah. Again, I can't thank you enough, Justine, for inviting me to this. It's always invigorating, and I'm always impressed with what I hear, always. And today, what I've found is listening to Rosemary, listening to you, listening to Rosie, how strong we have been to be where we are. But to answer your question, where you told me, how do you how do you help your children with the impact of mental health issues? I would say is talk to them about what we've experienced and say to them, these aren't good things we've experienced, but we've come through it. And it's okay to talk about these to me. Don't keep it in. Don't be ashamed about it. Don't be frightened about it. Talk to me about it. Together, we can do something about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of because you're strong.
Together we can. Together we can.
Absolutely.
I don't know if anybody has any questions, anything, any comments to add. We've got 10 minutes before we go. But if we don't have anything, we can go early.
I think for me, what I want to encourage ourselves is to talk to our children and find out their feelings. It is very, very important to have those conversations with, have a one-to-one with the child so that we can get to know their experiences at school. I've got an open communication with my daughter. She's almost in a all-white school. But the things she comes back with, she's very confident. She knows how to challenge it. But she comes back and tells you things that, you feel sad about, some of which you are able to challenge because you go back to school and said, this is not right. But we've got a weakness as people of our color. We rarely talk to our children.
We don't.
We rarely provide that time whereby a child can speak to you. So let us try to create time for our children and improve their mental health.
And interestingly, that's a grammar private school or something like that. High up there, you would think that they tend to deal with those things, promptly.
Yeah, they do, but children are children, and I think the best thing and what we have to encourage our children to do is to do their best. Because once they see that you've got something, you are better than them, they start respecting you, but still, racism will always be there, but how do we deal with them with that? How do we prepare our children, to safely navigate through it, deal with it without impacting on their mental health? Can you imagine someone being picked on every day, the impact it has on their mental health and confidence,
And that's having intersectionality as well. I met a young person who's got, oh God, I've forgotten the condition, the skin condition where you get a bit of patches.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Cirrhosis or something?
No, not that one.
No, basically they have white patches and black patches, don't they? Yeah, I know what you mean.
I've forgotten the word. If somebody can remind me in the chat room. And they were actually being bullied for that. So you can imagine they're already black, and then they've got that condition and they're being bullied for that. And then some children have like learning disabilities or autism or and they're being called certain names in school. And already that is two things happening. They're not confident because of their color. Then they have a certain condition that people use against them. So it is really difficult that we need to start thinking.
We need to talk about it, don't we?
That's the word. Vitiligo. Yeah. So we need to continue talking about these things to our children really openly, so that we normalize the conversation. We normalize the conversation. So thank you, everyone. Unless anybody has something to say from our audience, otherwise we'll be saying goodbye, and we'll be sharing the next link to our next conversation on mental health and well-being. Someone is waiting in the waiting room. Just let them know we've finished.
Oh.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ajit. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. I can't thank you enough. Thank you, everyone.
To everybody. Bye.
All the best.